Greetings, everyone, and welcome to session number 8 of the 30-day intensive on the topic of the Holy Spirit. For those who do not know me, my name is Bradley. I am also the host of Voices of Revival. Voices of Revival is a video podcast focused on uniting revivalists within the region of Dayton, Cincinnati, in Southwest Ohio. Through the month of September, however, we are diving into a 30-day intensive on the topic of the Holy Spirit titled A More Excellent Way. This title is derived from 1 Corinthians chapter 12. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul teaches on the gifts of the Spirit, and his final words in that chapter was basically him saying, this is a more excellent way. And it paints this picture that God has given us these gifts, these gifts of empowerment, these tools that he has given to us. And for us to settle in a way where we are not walking in everything that he has for us, we have settled in a way where we've settled for less than what he has made available to us. And Paul says to the Corinthians, there is a more excellent way. And just as Paul says to the Corinthians, I believe God is saying to us here and now, there is a more excellent way for us to step up and rise into, for us to step up and walk into, right? There is a more excellent way. So as we unpack this 30-day intensive on the topic of the Holy Spirit, we will wrestle with what it means to walk in the Spirit, and we will spend time unpacking the various gifts of the Spirit. Today we find ourselves in session number 8 of this endeavor. So far we have not gotten into any of the gifts. Tomorrow we will begin to discuss the various gifts of the Spirit. We have been laying foundation through our first 7 sessions, and we are laying a bit more foundation today. We were to recap where we have been and the foundation we've laid, because I think it is very important that we keep in mind the foundation we have laid, because we're laying this foundation for a reason, right? In session number 1 of the endeavor, we spent time looking at the various gifts of the Spirit, kind of like an overview of the gifts of the Spirit, right? We looked at an overview of the gifts of the Spirit, and we also spent time kind of unpacking context from Paul's writing to the Corinthians, right? And then in the second session, we wrestled with the question of who is the Holy Spirit? Who is he? He is God, the same God that we see there in Genesis chapter 1. Like, he is that God that we see in Genesis chapter 1. The Holy Spirit is literally there in the creation story. Before God the Father ever speaks a word of creation, Holy Spirit is there moving upon the face of the waters. Holy Spirit is the driving force in the creation story. The Holy Spirit, he is the Spirit of God that rests in the holies of holies, and the unworthy high priest would enter in, would be struck dead, right? Like, that same Holy Spirit lives inside of us. He is the same holy God, and he has made his home inside of us. And then in session number 3 of the endeavor, we spent time unpacking what Jesus taught on the coming of the Holy Spirit in John chapter 14, 15, and 16. That was then followed up with session 4, where we wrestled with the notion that the Holy Spirit is a God who speaks. From there, in our 5th session, we unpacked the topic of crucifying our flesh and walking in the Spirit. Following that session, we basically dove even deeper into that topic by unpacking the various fruit of the Spirit, by unpacking the fruit of the Spirit, and also we wrestled with biblical love as well. If we are walking in the Spirit, being led by the Spirit, being guided by the Spirit, like Jesus said we would, then the fruit of the Spirit will be the overflow of the Spirit in us. The love of God will be the overflow of the Spirit in us. If the Spirit is in us, leading us, then the fruit of the Spirit will flow forth from us, right? The love of God will flow forth from us. You know a tree by the fruit it bears. You know the apple tree is an apple tree by the apple that it bears. Likewise, if we are being led by the Spirit, you will know that by the fruit of the Spirit. Then in our previous session, yesterday's session, we exposed the topic of cessationism. The gifts of the Spirit, has not ceased. The operation of the Spirit has not ceased. The voice of the Spirit has not ceased. The Holy Spirit is alive. He is well, and He has made His home inside of us. Jesus said, and the Holy Spirit would flow forth from us. And there would be rivers, plural, of living water that would flow forth from us. Right? The rivers of living water flowing forth from us. It is the overflow of the Holy Spirit within us, flowing out of us. As we prepare to begin to unpack the gifts of the Spirit, we have to understand why. And we have to understand what the gifts are. What are the gifts of the Spirit, right? Like if we are being led by the Spirit, then the overflow of our life will be the fruit of the Spirit. It will be biblical love. But the Holy Spirit inside of us as we interact with the world around us. The Holy Spirit desires to touch the broken world around us. The Holy Spirit, the desire, the heart of the Spirit of God living inside of us is to see this world restored to God. That is the heart of the Spirit of God on the inside of us. The heart of the Spirit of God on the inside of us is to see the world around us restored to Him. In the Old Testament, it talks about how He will make rivers in a desert. And Jesus said, from us will flow rivers of living water. The gifts of the Spirit in operation are the Spirit inside, is the Spirit inside of us making rivers in a desert. It is the Spirit inside of us flowing forth with us and creating rivers in a wasteland. The gifts of the Spirit flow from us, flow through us to touch the world around us. There is a purpose for the gifts of the Spirit in operation. And you know what that purpose is? It's not us. It is to see the world around us restored to God. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 is where Paul teaches on the gifts of the Spirit. I want us today to look at a couple verses in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and then we're going to jump and look at a story from the book of Exodus. I believe this is a very important foundation that we must weigh, consider, and look at as we approach the gifts of the Spirit. Okay, so 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Directly before, literally one verse before the first gift of the Spirit is cited. In verse 8 that we see the first gift of the Spirit cited, the first two gifts of the Spirit cited. In verse 8 cites words of wisdom and words of knowledge, right? Verse 7 though, verse 7 says, but the manifestation, right? So the manifestation of the Spirit is given to every man to profit withal. The manifestation of the Spirit is given to every man to profit withal. And then it goes on to list all the gifts of the Spirit. What are the gifts of the Spirit? It is the Spirit inside of us manifesting through us via overflow as rivers into a desert. The gifts of the Spirit are the Spirit inside of us. It is the Spirit inside of us manifesting through us, touching the world around us. It says the manifestation of the Spirit is given to every man to profit withal. There is a purpose for the gifts of the Spirit manifesting. There is a purpose for the Spirit inside of us to manifest through us and touch the world around us. It does it with purpose. The Holy Spirit manifests through us with purpose, with a plan to see all things restored to Him. I want us to jump forward and look at a verse, one of the last verses in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And stick with me on this. We're going somewhere with this. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 28. And it says, and God hath set some in the church, first apostles, secondarily prophets, thirdly teachers. After that, miracles, gifts of healings, helps, governments, and diversities of tongues. So this is kind of breaking down, this verse here is breaking down various aspects of the church, and it lists things in tiers, right? The first tier of things that it lists is, as first, God has set in the church apostles. And then beneath apostles, God has set in the church prophets. And then thirdly, beneath prophets, he has set in the church teachers. And then after teachers, he then lumps together a conglomerate, a collection of various other things. After teachers, it says that he has set miracles, gifts of healings, and it includes helps and governments and diversities of tongues. So, when it comes to the things of the Spirit, we as a people in our flesh tend to set certain things above other things, and we put like certain things up on a pedestal, right? And we make a big deal out of certain things, and we look at other things as less than, right? Here in this verse, consider this. This verse 28 here, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 28. Puts helps and governments in the same tier of ranking as miracles, gifts of healings, and diversities of tongues. What does that even have to do with anything? Track with me. I want us to look at a story in Exodus. We're going to see this cited in two places in Exodus. We see what I want us to look at. We see it cited in Exodus 31 and also 35. So a little bit of foundation. Prior to Exodus 31, for like chapters upon chapters, like multiple chapters, like God is speaking to Moses and giving Moses like specific instruction on building the temple in the wilderness, right? Like he's giving him like detailed instruction on everything, to like the minute detail. Everything is detailed. So God gives all this instruction to Moses, and he's like, go build me this temple in the wilderness. I want like everything to be perfect and precise. And then look at this in verse 31. Or not verse 31, but chapter 31. Just taking chapter 31, Exodus 31 from the top. This like blows my mind here. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, see, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And catch this. Verse 3, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, in wisdom and in understanding and in knowledge and in all manner of workmanship, to devise cunning work, and to work with gold and silver and in brass and in cutting of stone, to set them in the carvings and the timbers, to work in all manner of workmanship. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. And then we see this kind of same sentiment reiterated in Exodus chapter 35. We see the same story, kind of like God say the same thing in Exodus 35. Looking at Exodus 35, picking up at verse 30, and it says, and Moses said unto the children of Israel, see, the Lord hath called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, and the son of Hur, the tribe of Judah, and he hath filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom and in understanding and knowledge and all manner of workmanship, to devise cunning works and gold, silver, brass, so on and so forth and so forth and so forth. What is all of this, like what is going on in the mix of this scenario. So for chapter upon chapter upon chapter upon chapter, right, like God gives to Moses clear instruction on how to build the temple. And then once God has downloaded the instruction to Moses, he then says to Moses, all right, I've given you the instructions on how to do it, but this guy over here, Bezalel, right, I am filling him with my spirit and he will do it. I've given you the instruction. You have the instruction, Moses. But Bezalel, I fill with my spirit and he will do it. Number one, right? Number one, like this, like theologically, like the story of Bezalel messes with a lot of people's theology, right? Like we are taught that, like in the Old Testament, the Holy Spirit just rested on man, but here in Exodus 31 and 35, God says, "I will fill Bezalel with my spirit." I fill Bezalel with my spirit for a purpose. The theological conundrum aside, something that is absolutely indisputable about this story of Bezalel here. Rather, it was on him or in him, as it appears to plainly state. Rather, it was on him or in him. The Holy Spirit was sent with purpose. The Holy Spirit came to carry out a job. And like, it was to build. It was to build a building. The Holy Spirit was sent to build a building. Listen. The Spirit of the living God has made his home in us. He desires to flow through us as rivers, plural, touching the desert around us. He desires to flow forth through us, touching the desert around us, to restore all things to him. He flows forth from us with purpose. And like us in our flesh, like we put certain things above other things. The heart of God is to see all come unto him. Like we have made the operation about the whole. I don't even know what we've made it about. Like church? What? Like if that's our understanding of what like a good flow of the Holy Spirit is, like good church, like what? The Holy Spirit resides in us, not so that we can have good church. Like if that's our understanding of what the flow of the Holy Spirit is, like we know nothing. The Holy Spirit isn't in us for us to fill something. The Holy Spirit isn't in us for us to have church. The Holy Spirit is in us to flow forth from us, making rivers in the desert. And it flows forth from us to make rivers in the desert. And it does it with purpose and intention. And like the tasks that his heart beats for are sometimes things that like us in our logic would deem as insignificant. The heart of God is for all to come unto him. The Holy Spirit flows forth from us, through us, to bring all things into him. There's nothing too small. the Holy Spirit will bend over backwards and bring all into him. And like in Exodus, it was to build a building. And like in the conclusion of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, like it puts helps on the same par of importance with miracles and healings and diverse tongues. Listen, the flow of the Holy Spirit is not about the gifts. The flow of the Holy Spirit, it is about the purpose. It is about the purpose. The purpose. The call. The message. The gospel. It is about all things being restored to him. And we are a tool in his hand. May he flow forth from us freely. May he flow forth from us like rivers in a desert. We are the place of origin for the rivers of Holy Spirit flowing into the desert. That's what the gifts of the Spirit are. The place of origin for the rivers of living water flowing into a desert. It's not about us. It's about the rivers flowing into the desert.